is that correct?
Yes, Henry Goes here.
Christine Brown, are you on the line as well?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. Charity, are you on the line? Okay, Isaiah, are you on the line? Okay, Shelly, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Dr. Gilly checked in. Frank, are you on the line? All right. Stephanie, are you on the line?
I am.
All right. John Jones, you're on the line as well.
Okay, that's good.
Richard, are you on the line?
Okay,
I'm here.
Perfect. Sammy, are you on the line? Okay, Vanya, are you on the line? And Javier, are you on the line? All right, did I miss anyone that just beeped in?
This is Ron Lane. I'm on.
Okay, hi, Ron. All right, we'll wait for a few more minutes. We're missing quite a bit of people still. Just hang tight.
just now, and it looks more likely that he will not be able to join. So I would ask Leticia, do we have a quorum? Sorry, that question wasn't for you, Leticia. We're doing a quick count here. Okay, we better wait for a couple more members.
Yeah.
I think we have a bare quorum.
I'm sorry, we do or do not have quorum?
Bare quorum right now. We're checking our numbers real quick, Leticia.
9 out of 17.
9 of 7.
Oh, we have 9 of 17. Yeah. So what would you like to do, Madam Co-Chair?
Well, was Scott able to express his concerns and his position on where we are at this stage?
My sense is that Scott does not have concerns, but I do not have, a specific final communication to that effect. But generally last week, he was very comfortable. Oh, great. We're beeping right now. May I ask who's just joined the call?
Good morning. This is John Jones.
Great. Hi, John. Good morning. And was there
Welcome,
another
John.
new caller? Okay, John, I thought I heard 2 beeps.
Is that John Jones?
Yeah, John has just
Perfect.
joined us.
Okay.
So Leticia, I think we should proceed. And I understand that a lot of people may have some time constraints. I'd like to start with Madam Chair and suggest that we ask her to identify any specific questions or concerns, and then alternate that she may have, and then I'll turn it back to Ricardo to move us through the latest draft.
I'm sorry, what exactly are we doing?
We want to know if you had any concerns before we jumped in, Leticia.
Oh, got it, okay, and you had this conversation with Scott as of last week, and nothing has changed since that conversation, correct?
That's right. But I don't want to say that he specifically said he had no concerns. We did have a conversation in which he indicated he was generally pleased with the draft. We would want to double check with him, of course.
Oh, excellent. Okay, well, I am very pleased what I have seen the process. I know it was certainly heated, passionate, which is exactly what it's supposed to be. And I think that helped us produce a final product that is, one of integrity, one that is, represents the legitimate interests of all those involved. And I am quite pleased with the outcome.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leticia. So I guess 2 quick things. If any of you have members of the public at your locations, prior to the end of the call, we'll allocate some time for any type of public comment. So if there are those of you that have that at your location, just be mindful of that. And secondly, as we're audio streaming this, whenever you make a comment, please just state your name, and it just helps us to kind of keep track of who's talking accordingly. So that said, we're going to jump right into it. There are 2 things in particular that we want to flag, and just 3 things in general that we want to draw to your attention. One is the minimum score threshold. We raised it briefly at the tail end of our last convening. We want to just make sure that we're clear on that topic. We want to address the rating criteria, and specifically just to see if there's any concerns that folks have that may be substantive. And then finally, just to flag that any text that you see that's in red represents an addition to the RFP since our last convening. They should reflect any of the comments that the body has made. So those are the kind of overarching things. And we'll just start with the first 2 more than anything else. And if there's anything in red that at the end of those 2 points you want to flag, you're more than welcome to. So please go to page 20. That's where the minimum score threshold component comes in at our first substantive piece. So on the minimum score threshold, there's a couple of school of thoughts that I'll look to some of the staff here to chime in as appropriate. So the use of a minimum score threshold can be used a couple of different ways. For some executive steering committees, they take the stance that they only want to fund, I've got my air quotes up, quality proposals. And to do that for those bodies, they set a number and said that, you know, any proposal that does not meet this particular figure or higher will not advance to be considered for funding. So what we proposed is a 60% minimum score that proposals must meet in order to advance to the next stage. Now, there's also another perspective that is not in favor for the use of a minimum score threshold, with the view that if folks know that there's a certain number that you must attain in order to go forward, that some of the executive steering committee raters may be inclined to, you know, not fully use a full rating scale, and maybe subconsciously may, you know, change the way they rate a proposal. So those are some of the, in a real kind of a high level synopsis form, some of the main kind of pros and cons of both approaches. We wanted to open it up and see if this body had any comments, but what we propose for this group is that you, if you do consider going with this minimum score threshold, that you have it at 60% or more, and then we'll talk about the additional points that I laid out before you. Concerns?
This is Shelley. I just have a question, Ricardo. I'm wondering what the precedent is for a 60% being the minimum threshold. I mean, 60% strikes me as awfully low.
We've actually used that type of figure before. I think a lot of proposals will kind of fall above that, but what it's a difficult number to kind of attain, Shelley. I think what you want to do is to find a figure where you know, all the proposals have a chance to be rated.
Can we see who's just joined the call?
Scott Budnick.
Okay, I heard Scott Budnick and Vonia Quarles, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, and thank you both. Ricardo was just answering a question about the minimum scoring threshold, and we're on page 20 of the draft.
Perfect. So sorry about that, Shelley. So we have used a minimum score of 60% in the past, most recently for one of our strengthening grants. And, you know, part of the thought process is that it truly is just the minimum that you need to go past. And I think each body kind of, you know, goes back and forth on what that figure is. But we try to set the bar, you know, at a point where every proposal, you know, that is worthy does, you know, receive some merit, with a thought process that each rater will then still go ahead and use that full range.
And this is Katie. I'd like to just add a couple of thoughts, agreeing with everything that Ricardo has said. And in addition, would just point out that we were trying to manage and anticipate a lot of different unknowns. One of those being, we don't know how many proposals you will receive and what the comparative quality of those proposals will be. And this minimum scoring threshold really should be what the committee regards as a comfortable minimum, depending on what we get, and also, of course, depending on how raters, undertake their own individual scoring processes. We may not the committee may not wind up recommending funding to a proposal that's any lower than, who knows, 70, 75, 80. It's just that the question you need to answer today on this is, what would be the lowest percentage score that you would comfortably fund?
Well, I have an opinion. Sorry. Hi, this is Tom Renfrey. I think that since we have responsibility to be good stewards of the public's money, that having a minimum standard is a good thing. I mean, we don't, if a proposal cannot meet 60% of what we consider to be a quality program, I just think, why would we throw good money at something that may not be very effective? And I think that I'm comfortable with that minimum score. Hopefully most of our proposals will go score way above that. I mean, I agree that I think that we'll get a lot of good ones, but I do think we need to set a floor that say, if you can't reach at least this level, you're just not ready to receive this money. So that's my opinion.
Other questions or concerns?
No, this is Stephanie. I kind of agree with Shelley. 60% seems sort of low. I think of that as like a B- almost.
We have a comment from Tony from our research staff.
Good morning, this is Tony Jackson. And the minimum threshold, it's like a second safe check. Whereas if the raters are actually reading and rating it and applying the full range of the score is going to be well above 60%. The 60% helps out with the raters that don't pay attention and that don't use the full range and that just give scores just to give a score. So 60% is a safe bet that if you read and rate the proposals according to their merit, you're going to exceed that 60% level. If you don't, you're going to have total scores that are below that 60%. You won't have too many proposals.
What's your take, Scott?
My question, this is Shelley again, is if somebody were to score 60% then and we had funding, that would mean would that mean that we would be compelled to fund them? And like Stephanie, that, I don't know what typical grading scales are now, but I think it was 67 was an F when I was growing up.
Right. Shelley, that's an excellent question. This is Katie. We don't know how many proposals we're going to get in, so we need to sort of build some scenarios. Let's just say, for sake of example, you were to get 100 proposals. There is going to be a curve. We have no idea how the different raters will approach the job of scoring and do all of that. So if you have 100 proposals and you have 50 of those proposals rated 70 and higher, it'd be, depending on which you're in the large category and which you're in the small funding category, you'd have absolutely no problem with getting down into that, comparatively lower scoring range. But what we don't know here is about how raters will actually approach their job of rating. And I think we at the staff feel like the 60 is really, really a backstop. We don't know whether we'll need to use it. If we do, it's sort of like, gosh, it needs to be at least that. And if there's a sense, I'm hearing the questions from some of the members of, well, is 60 too low? Should it be 70? I think that begins to get us into a situation where we know this committee doesn't want to leave money on the table, so to speak. So if the question really is, what is the quality number that you're willing to go down to? And I'd kind of like to ask Scott to jump in because he has quite a bit of experience working on ESCs and rating and so forth. So we're just trying to find a reasonable spot to land for the minimum.
This is Scott. So, I mean, I obviously am a huge champion and supporter of a minimum threshold. I do find 60 to be quite low. In community college system, which I also sit on the board of, if you get a D or an F, if they're both considered failing and you have to retake the class, hold on, ambulance. If you get a D or F, you have to retake the class. So if you do not score a 70, you're retaking that class and it doesn't count. And I do feel like 60 feels a little low to me. So 60, 65, 70 seems to be the range. I'm not going to be like in a crisis if we end up at 60, but I do find it a little bit low.
And this,
Can I say something? This is Perez here.
go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So I think my concern about saying 60 is too low or equating 60 with a D or an F, to me is there, we're comparing apples and oranges here because we don't know the biases brought into the grading process. I think it is very difficult to assume that all the decent, qualifiable applications are going to necessarily end up 70 or above. I think that remains to be seen, how that sorting process occurs, and I can't say with any real certainty that I have a good sense about what that's going to be. And I'm concerned about excluding folks by saying, we want to say people at least deserve a C versus a D, this, proverbial, failure or pass. To me, that's just too arbitrary and too uncertain, given that we don't know how the team is going to score and what the outcomes are like, and I don't want to be exclusive. So to me, 60 is a minimum, and we have the opportunity to, gauge the quality, but I just think comparing it to a pass or fail is arbitrary and not reasonable under the circumstances.
Thank you, Leticia. Did we just hear Charity come on the line?
Yes, this is Charity.
Hi, good morning, Charity. This
Hello.
is Katie Howard. We're
Good
talking
morning.
about the minimum scoring threshold on page 20 of your draft.
Okay, perfect.
And
This
in
is Mark
terms of,
Alley. Can I chime in?
sure, go ahead.
So I think the spirit of what we're trying to do is say there's some minimum threshold below which funding shouldn't be provided, but we're trying to ensure that the applications funded are as strong as possible. Do you ever do in this situation where, let's say, if funding is available for applications that score between 60 and 70, additional information will be requested?
No,
I know that creates more work and it may not be a feasible idea, but I've seen grants where we do want to get all of the funding out into the community, but you want to make sure that you're supporting projects and programs that at least, at a minimum are well articulated and B, are strong programs. And would there ever be some sort of technical assistance piece or support in improving certain areas of somebody's application between 60 and 70 to get them not just their score up, but to create a stronger program?
Hey, Dr. Gilly, this is Ricardo. I'll respond to that. So typically, we don't have a second opportunity to submit additional information. For the most part, we tell folks up front, here's what you need to do when you submit your proposal, which is basically what this current RFP product is. Our version of technical assistance is for things that are much minor. Just to, make sure that by the time the product reaches the ESC members, that we can assure some basic minimum threshold has been met. The other thing I did want to kind of point out too, to get back to your question, Shelley, about history. So we did some research here, and also for you, Scott. In our Burn JAG grant, our minimum threshold was 50%, and our strengthening grant, it was 60%, and those were two of our more recent grants. So all that to say that the minimum threshold is exactly that. And I want to be clear, we're not saying that the goal is to, fund, these type of proposals. It's truly just, if you use the entire rating scale, as Tony said, it really is just a fail safe to say, proposals that reach, this score or lower will not advance. So I think all we really want you to consider is, if you think 60 is not an appropriate score, maybe 65, but we want to just really kind of hone in this particular point, because what we're doing is we're putting faith in all of you as raters to say that you will use the full scale, and this really is just the last resort.
Yeah, this is Shelley again, then can I suggest that we go up to 65%? I just think, from a public perception standpoint, if we're funding proposals that are scoring 60%, only getting 60% of the 100% available, that just seems too low to me. So,
Where are you?
Can I suggest 65?
And can I chime in? This is Sophia.
Sure.
I just wanted to say, I don't think that if we set the threshold at 60, that it means we're gonna fund proposals at 60. And so I think, I hear we should raise it up, but I think what the ones that are funded will probably be well above 60%, I would hope. But this is just the threshold, consider.
Right.
So,
That's exactly right.
I think 60 or 65, I don't see a difference between the two, and I'm fine with 60%.
Vonia thinks, this is Katie, totally agree. And we certainly will use whatever percentage for this minimum threshold that the committee is most comfortable with. Just a couple of comments from our experience in this grant making, and particularly in the reading and rating. I think that there really is something that changes in the mind of a rater if you know you have a minimum scoring threshold, and that's what we want to avoid. We want you to really use that full 12-point scale. And then, of course, we need to be ready with some kind of a plan, and I'd like to just suggest this. We discussed this at the staff level last week. If it turns out, which I think nobody anticipates, and certainly we hope it isn't this way, but if it turns out that there's money left on the table because, once you get down to the minimum, whether 65 or 60, there's still funding that needs to be put out. What we would recommend to you as staff is that we re-release the RFP. So back to Mark's question, could we go back to the people who are closer to the line? We want this process to be clear. The rules are clear, the process is clear, it's transparent. And if we had to re-release the RFP, those applicants who were closer to that threshold could reapply and try to improve their proposals. So those are just a couple of other thoughts on minimum threshold.
And this is Ricardo again, just as a reminder, on page 22 is that sample scoring rubric. So, we keep referencing, using the full scale of the 0 to 12, and just, a reminder again, in those different key areas are, on the 0 end, no evidence, poor, fair, good, up to very good. So just a reminder of what that scale looks like. But on the staffs, we've heard 60, we've heard 65. I think we're comfortable with either figure, either 60 or 65. If the consensus of this group is to go with 65, we can do that and kind of move forward with some of the other issues.
Sure.
This is John Goddard. I'd like to add one thought to it.
Go ahead.
So I'm hearing both sides, and I'm understanding what the issue is. And the reality is that we don't, to the point that we made, we don't know how many good proposals will come in. We want to use the whole sliding scale for scoring. But if we did only have if everything came in at like 61 or 62% of scoring, they're technically over the minimum threshold, and so they would be scored even if they were particularly bad in certain respects. And what I don't see here is we don't have a minimum scoring criteria within each of these 6 categories, and so it's possible to get a 0 on budget and a 0 on community engagement, 2 things that we're valuing very highly, and still get funded. And so to me, that's a little bit too much of a stretch. You could score 0 and have no community engagement plan and have no budget and still be eligible. Whether or not we funded you, I understand is a different question, but the fact that somebody can be eligible of that is troublesome to me. So I either think it needs to be a higher minimum, or we need to have a minimum score required for each rating factor in order to prevent people from sandbagging on certain parts of these proposals and just putting all their weight in a project description.
Yeah, Tony Jackson has a thought on that. I'm sorry, one sec, Tony. We just are getting information that a member of the public is trying to join Shelley at her location in San Francisco. Shelley, can you please provide a floor and room number there?
Yes. 8, can you tell me what the number is?
That's gonna be someone would need to be met at the elevator, right?
Yes, 8412, and someone will meet them at the elevator.
Okay, and what's the person's name so we can convey who's gonna meet the member?
Lena.
Sorry?
Lena will meet them at the
Lena,
elevator.
okay, so Lena is looking for Brian on the 8th floor. Brian's been asking for the meeting location and hasn't been able to find it.
Thank you. Sorry about that. It's supposed to be posted downstairs.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, we'll get that taken care of. Okay, back to the business at hand.
This is Tony Jackson. John, to respond to your comment, in the past, we have had a dual minimum threshold where half the minimum threshold was set on a rating factor and the other half was set on the total score. But in response to setting a minimum threshold to each rating factor, that's not something that as a researcher that I would recommend, because then that's going to lower your pool of applicants that will meet that minimum threshold. In other words, what you're doing, and by doing that, you might as well say your minimum threshold is even lower. So I don't think there would be too many applicants that would be able to meet that minimum threshold for each rating factor and then a minimum threshold for the overall score. So what I'm going to throw out there for thought is that if you want to set a minimum threshold on a rating factor, then that minimum threshold should be set on the most important rating factor. That would be the rating factor that received the highest total percentage of score, which, looking at this proposal, would be the project description.
I appreciate your feedback. I guess the hybrid I would have proposed is that rating factors 2, 3, and 6 have a minimum scoring criteria of 50% for each of those 3. That would have been my proposal.
And we, of course, can build this in. This is Katie. I just would want to make a plug for simplicity so that the applicants understand exactly, how the scoring is going to work and how it's going to be calculated and so on. Again, from the experience of having had some of the prior BSCC grants appealed over scoring questions. So clarity, I think, is paramount.
Okay, John, with your recommendation, what would you set the minimum overall threshold for the score?
Using rating factor minimums as well, or just an overall minimum?
So can we get clarity? Are you saying doing the minimum rating factor?
Yeah, you got to come closer to the mic. I can't hear you.
Is your mic on?
Yeah.
Okay,
So are you saying,
there you go.
There you go.
so are you saying doing a minimum threshold just on the rating factors and no minimum threshold on the overall score? Are you saying doing a hybrid of minimum thresholds on the rating factors and the overall score?
Yeah, the latter. I was just thinking that the thing that's troubling to me is that we could have an eligible proposal that scores a 0, for example, on community engagement and budget. They could have the worst budget proposal. They could have no plan to involve the community, and then we're considering them in the end game. And if we have other proposals that at least address all the issues equitably, but maybe fall in the high 50s, we don't know how this is going to come out to the point that's being made before. But that goes both ways, in my opinion. We could have a lot of things score in the 50s, arguably, and then we have something that's got giant holes in it that's eligible for funding, and we can't, by law, turn it away if it's the highest thing on the list. So I'm either a fan of increasing the minimum threshold so that we have people have to fight to get all the points or get points at least in every category, or if you want to keep it at 60%, I personally think there has to be a minimum for a few of these more important factors that we've weighted more importantly to make sure that people don't just circumvent doing them.
I see.
mean, even if you just pick one, what if somebody just skips community engagement, but to hell with that? I mean, they could still get 80% if we have to potentially fund them. I just don't think that's right, but that's just me.
This is Shelley again. I agree with John on this. So can I throw a proposal out there to have the minimum bump up to 65%? And for the three things that John has suggested, saying that you have to meet at least 50%.
On
of
2,
the
3,
maximum
and
number of points for community engagement, project description, and budget.
I agree with that.
2, 3, and 6. Yep, we can make that work.
So that's 50% for each of the three.
So it's a 2-part minimum
65%.
scoring, right? And it's 65% for each, right? The overall score and
Yeah.
those three together.
50%, I think you said on the three.
Oh, did you say 50 there, John?
55% for the overall score,
Mhm.
okay, but at least 50%,
Okay.
so at least half the points in categories 2, 3, and 6.
Okay.
So if they can get 24 points in category 2, that's the maximum point. Or the weighted score, however you choose to evaluate it. The weighted score is 48. They have to get 24 out of 48 at least.
Got it. Yep.
That way, they don't score 0 here and still somehow get through.
Okay.
Just for those three, because the other ones are smaller and we didn't give them as much weight, so they're not as important. But at least they're then not avoiding a major component and still getting into the eligibility table.
Right. So your proposal really goes after that the key parts of the proposal have to be of decent quality. All three parts.
That's exactly right. Thank you.
Okay, all right. That's good. Any other comments? Scott and Leticia, do you think we have consensus here? Are you ready to move on? Okay.
Sorry, I was on mute. This sounds fantastic and good conversation. Some enlightening points that it makes sense to me. So I think we're good.
Okay, great. Let's keep moving in. If we can go down to the proposal narrative, we can go to page 75. And so for 75, basically just through about the duration of the document, kind of again with the same type of intros before. Text that's in red reflects additions based on our prior meeting. It was about a week and a half or so ago. We tried to incorporate all the feedback that the body provided and still ensure that there was a flow. So I think what we just wanted to see is that if there's any text that's in red that's unclear, that you feel in any of the sections, or we can go through section by section, but is there anything that doesn't reflect what this body wants to see present, and is there anything that we provide additional clarity on?
The only comment I have is regarding the principles of effective intervention. My understanding is that there are actually 8 principles, and most of these fit into one of them, which is like targeted interventions.
Stephanie, can you tell me what page you're looking at, please? I'm sorry.
Page 47.
47.
I can send those to you really quickly if you'd like, and you can look at them and then go from there.
Sure.
Okay.
Principles of effective intervention, Sophie said there are 8.
Oh, okay.
I think we just listed the top 4 that are most commonly referenced,
Okay.
but yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, any concern from other committee members on adding to that section? Okay?
So are there no concerns then or additions back to the proposal narrative on page 75? Kind of bearing in mind that this is it. This is where you will be rating proposals. We spent a great deal of time on establishing that minimum score and then the subsequent minimums. This is kind of the point where you should feel free to make any last second additions. This is what you'll be rating them on.
This is Colleen Curtin here. I want to point out to the committee that staff had a little bit of concern or angst, I should say, regarding page 78, the project description and how long that section was. And we really struggled with trying to trim it down and make it more concise. It's still pretty long, but we feel like an applicant who's writing to this section, their narrative really should flow from bullet to bullet to bullet. So though it looks overwhelming, it should be something that applicants can do in 15 pages. They just really are going to have to be very concise with their words. We just felt like there was nothing we could pull out here. Everything listed 3.1 through 3.9 were really important to the group. So I just wanted to point that out.
This is Sonia. I have a question about this piece around the project description. I thought that we had determined that housing was going to be part of what would be funded for Prop 47 population. And in 3.1, it doesn't mention housing, so maybe it mentions it somewhere else. But I thought that we had said that was critical to the entry.
So we split 3.1 and 3.2 into two separate bullet points. So 3.1 are the programs that are required by Prop 47. 3.2 lists housing related assistance and other community-based supportive services, which are to be prioritized if they're offered in addition to the required services. So that's why we separated those out, but the housing is there in 3.2. I want to point out on page 80, this is Colleen Curtin again, on the guiding principles section, 5.2 was moved from project description over to this section, guiding principles. We felt each of those bullets is one of the guiding principles. We thought that it fit better here. We also added 5.3.
Can we go back to 3.1 and 3.2? Because the way it's written, it looks like if it's just housing, if that's the service you're providing, then it doesn't meet the criteria because it's not listed in 3.1.
Correct. That is correct. Applicants must do one of the required programs first. They cannot submit a proposal that is housing alone.
So if I could add on to this, Sonia, I think the clarification that staff's trying to make, just to help parse this out a little bit, is that Proposition 47, if you remember from our very first ESC meeting, is the governing law, and that has an actual that's the legal requirement. And so the reason 3.1 is parsed out and just says mental health, substance use, and diversion is because at a minimum under Prop 47, that is what has to be provided by every project proponent. They have to do one or the other or a combination of those things. The housing and the community-based supportive services can and should be funded, but they come under a secondary level of law under AB 1056, and they get priority in the application. So when we went over this part in the drafting, we separated the two because at a minimum, the applicant can't get funding, the lead agency can't get money if their proposal doesn't have something in 3.1 in it. It has to be there. We give priority points to applicants that also do stuff in 3.2. So that's why they separated them.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thanks, John, that was very helpful.
Very welcome.
Just double checking on the line, did someone just join?
Shelley recalled back in.
Oh,
Called
okay,
back in.
thanks, Shelley, and
Sorry about that.
did the member or members of the public find you?
Yes.
Okay, terrific, thank you. All right, Ricardo?
Any other comments on project?
Hey, Ricardo?
Yes, go ahead. Who is this? Scott. Oh, go ahead,
So
Scott.
Ricardo, this is Scott. I just wanted to let you know that both Javier Starring and Charity Chandler are in our conference room at ARC.
Great, thank you, Scott. So any other
John, I
questions
just
on this
noticed
section?
that, we had received an email from Marianne O'Sullivan regarding a recommendation to add a rating criteria that would be inserted between 3.6 and 3.7 on how applicants have described their approaches being anchored in trauma-informed care and the readiness of the organization to provide trauma-informed care. And so I'm just wondering if other people felt that we should ask to add that into the rating criteria or not.
And just noting, this is Katie, for clarification, in project need 1.4, you consider that. Are there other spots, Ricardo?
Yes, guiding principles, 5.2.
Thank you.
So it is in 2 places. We felt putting it in 3 places would just be redundant. And applicants would tend to repeat themselves and
Exactly.
waste space,
Waste
waste
space.
precious space.
Waste precious space is exactly the point, Colleen, thank you. Not in
This
any
is Mark
way,
Kelly. I agree. I think the trauma focus is important, but it pops up in at least 2 other places.
Hello, this is John Jones. I understand the input folks are saying around this, but I really think that it should be spelled out. And I really don't find it redundant. I think what it does, it re-emphasizes the importance of trauma-informed care. And I think that's something that really is very needed. And I think that also goes into the spirit of the proposition itself, because like custodial, being housed, being incarcerated, or any services that's provided in a custodial setting is counter to trauma-informed, just as an example. So although it is listed in several places, I think under this rating criteria, it will allow all the prospective folks who want to apply for this RFP to understand that that's the gist of what this is about.
And John, to be clear, this is Ricardo speaking. We're not saying that obviously it's not important. We thought it was important enough that we actually mentioned it twice. I think what might practically happen if you put it in a 3rd place, our applicants will in fact restate the same thing 3 different ways, just to be perfectly honest with you. We really don't want that to be something that you end up reading and then, it takes away from someone else that they could perhaps be better explaining. And if they also do something to that avail in their budget, you could already see it 3 times potentially in the budget section, in 5.2, and again in section 1. So I think we really want to try to keep it clean for applicants in that context.
This is John Bowders. I just had a question then to balance the 2. I guess the overemphasis of this and people regurgitating the same points. That's a very fair point, Ricardo. What if we removed 1.4? Because it's only asking people to consider the need of trauma on the target population. So it's not asking them to do as much as the proposed language in 3 would do, which would be to describe how their approach, their actual methods are anchored in the principles of care. And so I'm just wondering if the group feels that asking people to identify the need is more important than the fact that they are ready as an organization to provide trauma-informed care. And if it's, I think it's a fair point that 3 times is too many for that item in here, perhaps for the purposes of writing and scoring, but maybe we just remove 1.4. And if John Jones thinks with me that this might be more appropriate to score them on the readiness of the organization, maybe it's more important to be in 3.
This is Stephanie. So I have a question, because I know we talk also with different principles, like regarding restorative justice as well. But I'm not really sure in this section if we're gonna spell out, you have to do trauma-informed services, you have to do restorative justice, and you have to do your mental health or substance abuse diversion. I mean, isn't it kind of like woven for them higher if they're doing some of those other guiding principles? But I don't know if we want them to actually have to go through and spell out what they're doing for all those guiding principles.
This is John Jones again. First of all, I totally agree with John Balders has said, absolutely, in terms of 1.4. And the second thing is, I think, in terms of rating, I think it's more than fair to be transparent with the people who want to apply, that they have a full and firm understanding of what it is that we're looking for. And at the risk of repeating myself, just the piece about trauma informed is really the most crucial aspect, because we already have a number of services and programs available. But some of the challenges is if the folks who are doing this work don't have a full understanding of the needs of the demographics that Prop 47 covers, then that in itself presents the challenge that we already been facing. So long story short, I agree with everything that John Balders laid out. Absolutely.
I have a suggestion. So this is Tom Renfrey. I have a suggestion. Since project need is what, is like 10%? Is that 10%?
Yeah, I think so.
And the project description is 25, because the project description is more heavily weighted, so we might, I understand you're wanting to move the trauma piece into something that is a more heavily weighted piece of the proposal. So what if we take out section 1.4 and then add into the rating criteria for the project description a section that says how the applicant must describe how the project addresses the impact of trauma on the target population, something to that effect.
Yes, John Jones again. I think that's fair, because just like with 1.4, that word considered, like, what does that really mean, right? I mean, for me, if someone says, okay, I consider this impact, that doesn't tell me
what they're doing
how they consider, what these considerations, like, it's not, it's not fleshed out enough for me to feel comfortable. I mean, someone could say, okay, yeah, we talked about it for 3 minutes and we reached this conclusion, and then,
Well, this is Colleen again. I think the logic behind this was the applicant would be building or telling a story. So in the needs section, they're telling you, how they targeted their target population, what factors they took into consideration as they developed it. Then they move into the project description and other sections and tell you what they're going to do about it. But I think the suggestion to move 1.4 into section 3 is a good one. I would only, though, caution then we maybe take another look at 5.2 and remove it from. I really don't see, remove it from there as well, because I don't see how applicants will address it differently here than in section 3.
Oh, yes, this is John Jay again. Just one last comment on this. I think it's important that we don't see this as an and or when we're talking about trauma. It has to be a complete part of the process. So I don't want to view it as something that's distinct, or that's something that's, an add-on, or something that, okay, you might be doing work, but this is also something to consider. I think that needs to be at the heart of any service that's provided. And sometimes, like someone told me, that the key to marketing is repetition. Because I think this is also a wonderful opportunity to expand and extend this culture shift around incarceration, specifically with mental health and substance abuse issues.
This is Colleen. I think that's a really good point, John. And I think that section 5 really was, the intent behind section 5 was to allow the applicant to sort of, wrap everything up as it addresses those guiding principles. So your point is well taken.
This is Ricardo. So it doesn't seem like there's any concerns in with us modifying section 3. If that's the case, are there any other concerns for any of the other rating criteria sections?
Hearing none, this is Katie. I just want to draw the attention of the committee back to the scoring table that's on page 20. We wanted to just be sure to ask specifically, and people didn't raise this before, but I just want to double check and confirm the way the score addresses the total possible points, addresses this larger pass-through to community-based organizations being 2 additional points if between 60 and 69% of grant funds being passed through, and then 4 additional points. So that's the way we made it concrete. Hearing none, such will be the order.
Okay, great. So I'll just say, just kind of like wrapping up a little bit of some of the overarching stuff. Text in red reflects additions, things that I guess would be considered substantive if you haven't already had a chance to kind of go through it, but really just be the definitions. And thanks to John B. for providing us some of the housing related definitions. Begin on page 44, there's examples examples are included on different housing models, from housing first to permanent supportive housing, et cetera, all the way through. So those are, I guess, would be some of the bigger additions. Vanya, you wanted us to clarify that funds could not be used in a custodial setting. That's also been included in the text and also on the applicant information form. On page 73, there's a prompt that the applicants will have to respond to. There's in box F, and they have to kind of affirm, yes or no. So that'll be clear for us to kind of identify. So those are some of the substantive components. The rest are truly verbiage that the ESC provided at our last meeting.
Yeah, this is Katie. I'm really sorry because I didn't notice how this had been operationalized into the application form. So this is news to my staff. I'm not comfortable with the way the question is framed on F because it reminds me of those propositions where if you don't want that thing, you're supposed to vote yes. It's what. So that's how this hits me. It needs to be clear. If this is what we're saying, that services are not permitted to take place in a custodial setting, the question should be flipped. I don't know what it should be. I'm looking at page 73. Will any services take place in a custodial setting? Basically, yes is the wrong answer. So, right?
Right. So what we did do on page 8, we have not that we can't clarify.
Yeah,
so just to start there. But on page 8, we have a section that says ineligible grant expenditures.
Right.
And the second bullet says programs, and it says Prop 47 grant funds may not be used for, says the acquisition of real property or programs or services provided in a custodial setting. But yes, we can.
I'm glad that's there.
We can clarify.
With the approval of the committee, I think it should say something like these services in this grant, may not be provided in a custodial setting, period. Does your proposal meet this criteria? Yes, no, something like that. Okay.
Yeah, because the way it's worded, you're asking them to sort of implicate
Answer no.
themselves.
Yeah.
Well, or just, you're saying you can't use service in the custodial setting, and then you're asking, are
Right.
you going to do that anyway?
Yeah, we don't want
Yeah,
confusion.
right.
Yeah, or to Katie, all services will take place out of the right answer.
Okay.
To that. If you put that line in there, what if it is some county is applying and they're going to do something that is in custody? So there are examples throughout the state where somebody could be arrested and still be in custody, even though they are a misdemeanor. And then organization say, I want to go and meet them while they were in custody to start engaging them to be overall services in the community. And if we say, so would that be considered that they are actually providing services in a facility?
Good question.
engagement and service are different, but we need to make that more clear. I think that's fair.
And this is Tom. I agree with John. We have substance use treatment programs that do go into custodial facilities, engage people with the purpose of, and basically this is, preparing them to come out and then go into a community-based setting. But that's different than actually providing a program in that custodial setting. I think there is a distinction there. We don't want the latter. We don't want to encourage programs that are set up and actually doing the programming within the jail or prison.
This is Aaron McGuire. Could you say something to the effect of this does not include risk and needs assessments or placement assessments, something to that effect?
I have a proposal based on that. I think that the language Vanya asked us to have, which I think is the right language that was on page 8, that we added, programs or services provided in a custodial setting not being used for that. I would maybe change, I would read that actually, the way it's written, and then I would go to 72 and I would change F, and I would make custodial setting, instead of saying indicate whether services will be provided, I would say indicate whether outreach or initial engagement will be provided to anyone while they remain in custody. And then that would be the question. So it's very clear that it's only to initiate contact or to initiate engagement with a person pre-release, but not to actually provide a direct service in custody.
Vonia with their hand up. Another option might be on page 73, instead of saying, instead of F being custodial setting, that we actually name it what we want. And it should say non-custodial setting. And then if you want to break it out further in the white box area, and just say, are your services going to take in a non-custodial setting?
Wouldn't that just be, why would we ask that if we know the answer is yes?
We don't know if the answer is yes or not. We don't know if they've read page 8. I don't. I think that it needs to be clear.
I see what you're saying. I got you. You're right. I got you.
This is Katie.
Do we need asking though? Will any of them take place in a non-custodial setting? Though implies that they're normally taking place in a custodial setting. I feel like we should use the question. I would rather keep the question this way. So if they mark yes, it's like a deal breaker. I would rather catch them answering this question this way. Will any services take place in a custodial setting? If they say yes, it should automatically go for like a immediate review for eligibility.
And that's fine, John. John, I think that's fine. I think that's fine too, but I think the blue box saying custodial setting should actually say non-custodial setting, because that's what we want. And the challenge, when I
think it should say services location and not any setting at all. I think it should just say services location, because if it says non-custodial setting, I mean, whatever you call it is fine with me in the end, but think about the question that comes with it, which is, if you say, will any services take place in the non-custodial setting? Now imagine I mark the box yes. It doesn't tell you that I could still be doing them in a custodial setting. Right?
I'm not saying change the words of the white box, so it will still read, will any services take place in a custodial setting?
Okay, I see what you're saying. You just want to change blue only.
That's my suggestion, and the reason why I think that not having it in custodial settings actually is more evidence-based, because usually if it's a custodial setting service, the restricted populations are people who don't have criminal histories, or they don't have certain types of criminal history, and we all know why that doesn't work. So really, whether a person does their intake before the person leaves, as long as their re-entry services happening outside of a custodial setting, I think that's the intent.
Well, I support changing the blue box on 73, like you suggested, to non-custodial, leaving the white box the way it is.
The thing is, if you've already told people that you're not going to
be reflected on 72 as well.
If you've already told people you're not going to cover custodial settings, why would anyone answer yes to that? Because they would basically just be disqualifying themselves.
Is it,
Yeah, I don't know that, I mean, the question to me almost, yeah, it makes it look legitimizes that you
Right.
could do it. And I agree, like, we want to make sure they know that on page 8 you're not supposed to, but would it just confuse the applicant? Because if it's asking it, may make them think, well, maybe I can do it. You know, why is there a yes, no here? It should, maybe it shouldn't be a question at all. Maybe it should just say non-custodial setting. Instead of a question, it should just say applicants may not provide direct services in a custodial setting on the application page. When they sign that bottom of that application form, they have signed that they understand they can't provide services there. Don't even ask the question.
I like that.
I think that it's right. We should, if there's gonna be anything there, it should say something like confirm that no services will be provided
That's right.
There you go.
in a
That's-
custodial setting.
yeah.
And then you could even put as a second sentence there, something to do with allowing InReach, to engage, right? So you could do both together. But I think no question's a better way to go.
I think that's right. And also
Make a
we,
statement, they sign the bottom of the form and they sign that they understand that they're, make them initial next to the box. I understand, like, the applicant recognizes that no direct services may be provided in a custodial setting. They initial next to the box. And there's like no issue there. They read it and they get it. They're not doing it.
Yeah, and there's no, I mean, there's no yes, the yes, no is almost, it could be confusing and get somebody who really has a strong program and they get confused on it and then it creates some administrative review right away. That's a problem.
This is Ricardo. We've heard the comments and I think we're good. We'll clarify. Thank you all for that feedback. Are there any other?
I had one.
Yes, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I had one. On page 12, in the box, for the project category, smaller and larger scope, maybe I'm misunderstanding it, maybe it's just not reading clear to me, but we have under smaller scope up to $1 million for the entire 38-month grant period. Isn't it $1 million a year renewable? It's not $1 million for 3 full years. Right? It's $1 million a year renewable. That's how I thought it. We had boxed it out. We had other columns when we had it on the project, the overhead that you had up on the screen. But I thought it was up to $1 million grant a year. So that was the small county. I can't imagine a small application of like $330,000 a year.
Which page?
this is page 12.
Page 12. And so I just thought I just wondered if it was supposed to be, you know, these limits thing for the full grant period or for each year of the grant period. I just didn't know if I was reading it wrong or what.
Go ahead, Colleen.
This is Colleen. At the last meeting, I recall the group saying that we would be able to potentially fund 20 projects in the small category at this threshold. So staff thought the intent was 1 million total per project.
So, well, okay, well, if that's what people want, I think that's, I don't know, it just seems that didn't seem to be what I thought it would be, but that's okay.
Well, and that's why we're having this review. If it needs to be reopened, it can be.
So, but John, so nothing's changed though. So this verbiage that's been here is for the past, I'm gonna say at least 2-3 meetings. We haven't changed anything other than we got rid of some of the other examples that were included. And at the time, the body seemed to agree with this approach.
That's fine. I'm not arguing. I'm not claiming anything is wrong. I just, when I read it, and I realized it's not red, so I know it's not the first time that you put it here. I just didn't, when I read it this time, for some reason, it dawned on me that like, okay, so they're only going to get up to $1 million over a 38-month period. I just tried to figure out what application somebody would do that would be that. And so maybe, you know, I just missed the boat when we had that discussion.
No, I don't think you missed the boat, John. I mean, so, and I'm trying to recall, so, you know, others on the call, feel free to chime in. You know, someone could do a diversion program in a city where they could request less than that. And I think part of the reason why the group felt comfortable with this approach is because you're saying to folks that you have either option. That if someone felt that they had a project that would cost $1.5 million, for example, and they were in a small city or jurisdiction, this still gave them the flexibility to do that.
And this is Stephanie. My recollection was that we were thinking that it was $1 million over the 3 years, that it was for just small projects. Some counties, especially smaller ones, maybe couldn't even put together a program for $1 million a year. So I think we were just thinking small projects. And then they had the option, they could apply for larger projects if they wanted.
Are there other questions or concerns or comments on this part? Ricardo, would now be the time to call for public comment?
It would be.
Okay. So here in the Sacramento office, any public comment? I'm just gonna call on each location. No public comment here in Sacramento. In the Los Angeles Anti-Recidivism Coalition location, is there public comment?
Yeah, thank you. Hi,
Nope.
Mary Ann O'Sullivan. Whenever you're ready, Mary Ann O'Sullivan would like to say something.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The Child and Adolescent Health Measurement Initiative, and thank you all very much for being so thoughtful about trauma-informed care in this RFP. I really appreciate the time and thought that's gone into it. And I understand that we're moving it out of, or you're moving it out of the section on need and putting language in the section on project descriptions, I think is great. I just wanted to encourage that to not just move the language from the needs section, but rather to consider the language that I emailed most of you, including staff, because that language actually will require people to describe what they're going to do, you know, and we want to make sure that a lot of people like to talk about trauma-informed care because they really appreciate the trauma that happens to people and the importance of addressing it, but we want to make sure that people really do the right work to figure out what are some of the real promising practices and evidence-based things. And also with their organizations, this particular opportunity, I think the steering committee there's language out that says, you know, you describe what you're going to do or describe how you're going to build the capacity in your organization to take on trauma-informed care. And I think both of those things are really important. So I'll just read the language that I sent just sort of for the record, but I'd encourage this language if you're willing. The applicant has described how their approaches are anchored in principles of trauma-informed care and has described the readiness of its organization and its partners to provide trauma-informed care and or its plan to build capacity to do so. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment from the Anti-Recidivism Coalition location?
No one's here.
Okay, moving to Oakland, to the LAU State Office Building with John Jones.
Yes, no public comments here.
Okay, thanks, John. From the Judicial Council location in San Francisco, Shelley?
No public comments here.
Okay, thank you. National Center for Youth Law in Oakland? Okay, hearing none, people can jump in. Since I don't need to go through, there are many other locations. If anyone has someone there with a member of the public who'd like to comment, please jump on. Okay, Ricardo?
Great, so thank you. So just to summarize, staff is going to make a few minor revisions in the rating criteria section, as well as to the scoring threshold to reflect the 65% in the minimum in the three categories that were identified earlier as well. The next step for us will be on November the 17th. Staff will present this RFP to the BSC board for approval. Hopefully that will go well, and if it's approved, then the RFP will be released the next day on November the 18th. And then as staff will send you an email that would include just a heads up on the status of the board's action and then just some other follow-up criteria. And then responses to this RFP are not due back until February, I believe it's the 21st. And so at which point the next step for this body will be for us to have a a training on how to read and read proposals, and we'll set a subsequent date when all can be available. So are there any questions about next steps at this time?
This is Christine. Could you just have a lot of notice on when the next trainings are going to be for the how to do the evaluation?
Yes, we will probably do a doodle or something to that effect. But yeah, we'll provide as much notice as possible. We would do it today, but not everyone is here. But we'll definitely do that, Christine.
Thank you.
Great.
Yes, it's John Jones here. I don't have a question, but just a quick comment. I want to thank staff for their due diligence on this work and all the work y'all been putting in behind the scenes, and also being so gracious with us, because we all here, we all want to do the same thing. I know sometimes we may be a little passionate in some of the things we say. So I just want to thank you all for the job that you're doing.
John, this is Katie. On behalf of all of us, we really, really appreciate that. This has been a tremendous team effort and a real privilege to work on this with all of you.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone for your time. We can conclude this call.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Leticia.